After 5 minutes of complete silence, you acquire an infrascope in a morgue, and shortly after, hear one of those mutated large gray bodies hit the floor. You hear the creepiest abnormal breathing sounds, and one of those large gray dead bodies appear at the doorway, trapping you in the small room with that thing. This is the music that plays when this happens. Now replace that soundtrack with this. Not as effective, is it? My name is Matt, and welcome to another episode of Creating a Great Horror Game. Now that I've made it clear how essential good music is in horror games, in this episode I will cover on how to make a horror game soundtrack that can play with our heads and make us look behind our shoulders every few moments. I thought I wouldn't do a top 10 video or any list that goes beyond 4 things because I thought I'd stay true to the Goldilocks rule for this video, to get the advice across, but just short and concise enough for this to be easy to remember. And knowing how short an average YouTube viewer's attention span is, I think 3 is the sweet spot. So here are the 3 keys to a horrifying horror game soundtrack. Key number 1. Resemblance. Though there are exceptions, making the soundtrack of your person, place, or thing resemble that thing is crucial in keeping the feeling you're going for and allowing your world to stay believable. If your soundtrack is playing high-pitched sound effects only to a monster that makes the ground beneath you shake, that is an example of bad pairing with a soundtrack and thing in horror games. So, if you're making or even picking out a free-to-use soundtrack for your horror game, please, for the love of Voltaire, don't just pick a random soundtrack and slap it to your game just because you think it's spooky enough. Allow me to elaborate. Say you're working on a sci-fi horror game that deals with a setting similar to that of the Alien movies. Do you think this music would help enhance the feeling you're going for? I don't think so. When you're creating or picking music for your horror game, you must take a moment to scan through your map and story. What are the walls made of? Sheetrock? Metal? If it's metal, no, don't play metal music, but consider adding in metallic echoes, screeching of steel, or some beat involving the sound of 2 plates of iron being clashed together. Something like that. If the story involves some creature that breathes heavily, perhaps add in some faint, distorted breathing sounds. Key number 2. Contrast. In my tips to creating a godlike horror game video, I stated it's important to have contrast between dark levels and peaceful light levels. If your game is dark the whole time, it becomes exhausting and even dull. Same with your soundtrack. You need to add in peaceful soundtracks in peaceful levels and dark ones in dark levels. Not only this, you need to have contrast in the very music itself. And I'm not talking about a peaceful part in a dark soundtrack, definitely not. I'm simply talking about adding in a large variety of sounds, like high-pitched and low-pitched sounds. Make the soundtrack stereo as well, so for people with surround sound headphones or speakers, you can play with their head by creating sound effects that play all around their head, making the soundtrack extremely atmospheric and real sounding. Just make sure the sounds resemble that of your environment. Key number 3. Distortion. Familiarity blended in with non-familiarity can add a disquieting, supernatural feeling to your music. The reason I love Maya's piano music on YouTube so much is that he has that creepy, distorted vibrato he gives to his piano soundtracks. Distorted instruments, everyday noises, and human voices, if done right, can have a paranoia-inducing effect on one's mental state. When we humans see or hear something familiar, we can distinguish danger from security so that we can feel at ease. When we hear a sound we cannot register as a familiar, safe thing, we just become simply scared and on edge. But what I prefer is when we hear something both familiar, but also at the same time, unfamiliar. It confuses our minds, and that's what forges that creepy feeling we get. You know, like that feeling you get when you look at an image of an uncanny robot that's built to look like a human, but you know that something's slightly off. And you know what? I've decided our next video will be an in-depth, thorough look at the uncanny. So to catch us when we upload our next video, be sure to subscribe and hit the notify bell icon. And before I end this video, I'd like to raise awareness of something called Article 13. The article is just as evil as the number. I suggest you not to click off this video because this Article 13 has a bullet with YouTube's name written on it. So, for any of you living in Europe, if this new article passes, you will no longer be able to watch Frictional Weekly and all of your favorite YouTubers any longer, as this will ban any channels with any copyrighted content in them for the EU, of course. This means about 70% of my audience will no longer be able to watch Frictional Weekly or any other channel that hosts copyrighted content they do not own. To better understand this matter, I highly suggest you watch Philip DeFranco's and other content creators' videos on this matter, and then share those videos as much as you can. Now, of course, I'm pretty strict about not doing news-like content on politics or anything controversial, as I want this channel to be all about horror entertainment. But I feel like mentioning this nightmare of a situation is horror-esque enough for all of us content creators, so I think mentioning this is very justified. Because if we don't stop this article from passing, YouTube as we know it, with original content creators, small and big, will be greatly affected by this, and especially the ones who make a living out of this. So please, spread awareness of the very real horrors of Article 13, and I will see you all around.